Welcome back. Waltzing to the White House. Vice President Kamala Harris has selected Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to be her running mate in this year's election. We'll talk about who Vice President Harris was considering, who Tim Walz is. We'll talk about the thinking behind Harris's decision, the runner-up Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, and how Walz might help or hurt the ticket going forward. We'll be talking about all those stories and more today, August 6th, 2024. From Ishan Media, this is the Ishan S. Show. With me, your host, Ishan. Welcome back to the Ishan S. Show. Thank you so much for joining us. So after a very short wait, Vice President Kamala Harris has officially made her pick for vice president. Earlier this morning, she announced in a text message to supporters that she would be picking Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota to be her running mate. And I'll read the statement. It's on the screen for you right now. She said, quote, "I'm pleased to share that I've made my decision. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz will join our campaign as my running mate. Tim is a battle-tested leader who has an incredible track record of getting things done for Minnesota families. I know he will bring that same principled leadership to our campaign and to the office of the vice president." Of course, Kamala Harris making this official announcement 4 years to the day that she got the call from Joe Biden. It's a pretty interesting pick if you ask me. The decision to select a running mate was on a really tight deadline for her, mainly because the vice president said that she would pick her running mate by August 7th, which is tomorrow, but also the end of the roll call count for the Democratic National Convention, in which they have just nominated Vice President Harris last night, but will now also nominate Governor Walz. And the decision really, if we start looking into the decision, it came down to 6 finalists for the position. And we were starting to get those reports about Thursday evening. And those finalists were Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, Senator Mark Kelly, Governors J.B. Pritzker, Andy Beshear, Josh Shapiro, and of course, Tim Walz. Harris and her vetting team then met with all the prospective candidates over the weekend, from which we learned that Kelly, Walz, and Shapiro advanced in the final round for an in-person interview with the vice president. And we got that report that Shapiro, Walz, and Kelly all went to the Naval Observatory to meet with Vice President Harris. After those interviews, we learned Monday morning that the decision had then narrowed down to Walz and Shapiro. So between Shapiro and Walz, we had really 2 competing factions within the Democratic Party. We had the moderate centrist wing of the party and then the more progressive side, your typical Democratic Party chaos. It was more or less defined with the moderate centrist wing attaching themselves to Shapiro, and that's mainly because he's the popular centrist governor of Pennsylvania, a must-win state for the Harris and Trump camps. He won the state by 15 points, an incredible feat for anybody really in Pennsylvania. And he's approved by 61% of his constituents, which in a state like Pennsylvania is a pretty big deal. Now, throughout this whole process, he did spark some, controversy here and there on matters of policy. He was told that he was a little too moderate, landing on the right of Kamala Harris on a few issues such as school choice and energy policy. But in an election that basically flipped in favor of rapid momentum for Kamala Harris, where there were concerns among young people and progressives that this momentum could very quickly be blunted by a Shapiro selection. Now, for his part, Shapiro had pretty much been auditioning for the job on the stump and in speeches, including criticizing his prospective opponent and Republican vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance. Now, we had the progressive wing of the party, which was very much lobbying for Governor Walz, who Vice President Harris ultimately went with. Walz has this very long and diverse career, which includes 24 years in the Army National Guard, high school social studies teacher and football coach, and he delivered a state championship for that team. That was before politics. Then he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2006. He represented Minnesota's 1st congressional district for 6 terms, focusing on Veterans Affairs issues, including being chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee. He focused on rural health care and agriculture. In 2018, he was then elected as the governor of Minnesota, emphasizing his bipartisan cooperation and pragmatic approach to governing. And his name, we learned a little bit during the COVID-19 pandemic, including during the time of the BLM riots that year. So, he faced a little criticism for his handling. Republicans are saying he supposedly exacerbated the issue, and we won't really go in depth about exactly how their side also did stoke much of the tensions, but Walz did call the National Guard and he did try to quell the violence. But anyway, politically speaking, Walz appeals to both his appeal spans progressive voters because, fighting for that liberal agenda. In his time as governor, he signed a lot of environmental policy, pro-labor policy, and a policy that I've really paid attention to, which is providing free breakfast to all kids in the state of Minnesota. And, making sure kids don't go hungry in your state, I think that's a pretty good stance to take. But he also has this very Midwestern, folksy charm to him. I mean, look, he seems pretty progressive, but funnily enough, this Democrat nominee for vice president has an A rating from the NRA. That's what he got during his time as a member of Congress. He talks about the bread and butter issues that matter to everyday Americans. He was elected to 6 terms from a swing district. Tim Walz has an appeal that Shapiro may not necessarily lack, but we've not really seen him be able to tap into. Now, Shapiro, while he could have plausibly delivered Pennsylvania, I think Walz is a strategic voice to appeal to all sorts of voters in the Midwest. If anything, Donald Trump picking J.D. Vance is the equivalent of Harris picking Walz, a somewhat kind of swingy state that now is selecting him. To Midwesterners, and the appeal is to Midwesterners more broadly. Admittedly, though, Walz does not have all those weird headlines, unlike Vance. And I should point out that actually, Walz is the one who started this Democrat trend of calling Republicans weird. It came from Walz. So with this now selection of Walz, I got to hand it to Vice President Harris's team. 16 days ago, she was still the VP nominee herself. In 16 days, an entire apparatus of setting up a vetting team to do the background checks on these candidates. And mind you, these background checks are an incredibly intensive and extensive process. They look at just about everything you've done. Publicly spoken policy stances. They look into your financial secrets. They ask you about all sorts of stuff. And it's hilarious how in-depth it gets. But that's what makes this entire process so uniquely impressive. Harris and her team managed to do an in-depth review of all of these candidates and make a choice. It's not like they had a choice in this matter. Kamala Harris had like 2 hours before she became the nominee. So this was the only choice they had. So she had to fast track this entire vetting process. And it wasn't easy. As someone who has followed this process for years, there were a lot of fears of them potentially Sarah Palining this. And you can watch my episode on J.D. Vance's selection to learn a little bit more about Sarah Palin and why we try to vet our vice presidents. But anyway, that was the thinking behind the selection of Tim Walz as Kamala Harris's running mate. When we come back from the break, we'll talk about the reaction to Walz's selection and how it bodes with the party. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short break.
Hi, this is Tim.
It's Kamala Harris. Good morning, Governor.
Good morning, Madam Vice President.
Listen, I want you to do this with me. Let's do this together. Would you be my running mate and let's get this thing on the road?
I would be honored, Madam Vice President.
The joy that you're bringing back to the country, the enthusiasm that's out there, it'll be a privilege to take this with you across the country.
Well, let me tell you, I have just the utmost respect for you. I have really enjoyed our work together. You understand our country. You have dedicated yourself to our country in so many different and beautiful ways. And we're going to do this. We're going to win. And we're going to unify our country and remind everyone that we are fighting for the future for everyone. So let's get out there and get this done, okay?
Let's do it. Do the work in front of us. Let's win this thing.
That's right. All right, buddy. I'll see you soon. Take care. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
In today's fast-paced and chaotic political landscape, it's more important than ever to stay informed and responsible as voters. That's why the Ishan S. Show is here, to help you make sense of it all. It's my mission to democratize news access, provide unbiased reporting, and deliver real analysis on the biggest issues of our time. And I love this job so much because it allows me to teach and inform so many people, specifically young people, about the interesting and ever-changing world of American politics. And so if you find my episodes valuable, please share them with your friends and family. It's the best way to help this show grow. Please don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, and check out the political news blog and subscribe there on the ishansshow.com for more in-depth analysis. We're also active on X and Instagram, so be sure to follow us there as well for breaking news posts and updates about the show. Every time someone tells me that the Ishan S. Show is the reason they went out to vote or they paid attention to a news cycle, it means the world to me. Thank you for your incredible support over the past 3 years. Your engagement and dedication mean the world to me. And as we head into the final weeks of the 2024 election, I look forward to continuing this journey together. And now we're going to return back to the great episode that we have planned for you. So the reaction to Walz, just like with basically any of the selections that Harris could have made, was honestly mixed. We had progressives and young people who were, universally very happy about the decision. I have talked to voters, I have talked to people on the inside of the Democratic sphere on the left who are pretty happy with the selection of Walz. They see him as the progressive choice, and precisely from his time as governor. He has managed to tap into a segment of the Democratic electorate that Kamala Harris herself was strong with, but is now also exciting with a Walz selection. With Shapiro, like I mentioned earlier, he was risking turning off some of those voters on the left who have been a big part of Harris's momentum, while also he was going to bring in that centrist vote and, those people like the Nikki Haley type of Republican voters who didn't want to vote for Donald Trump, but really needed a reason to vote for Harris. And I've been looking throughout channels and platforms, and I've seen some discontent with the Walz selection. Most are dismissing him as a leftist candidate. But like I mentioned, he has the progressive credentials, but he also has the bipartisan and centrist chops that I think really matter. I don't think a lot of progressives, not a lot of progressives I meet have an A rating from the NRA. But Walz got cheers of support from President Barack Obama, Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, Minnesota Senators Amy Klobuchar and Tina Smith. Mainstream Democrats, for the most part, are happy with a Walz selection. I read a report that centrist Democrats took a sigh of relief that it wasn't someone too progressive, and most are throwing their support behind Walz Harris. And honestly, I think it's only fair. There were so many Democrats who were responsible for President Joe Biden dropping out of the election. This intra-party chaos was only going to harm the Democratic ticket, no matter who took the spot. And there was, near split support within the party for both sides. Not particularly ideological. We had progressives and moderates coming alike to support and oppose Joe Biden. But whatever it is, those people got what they wanted when Joe Biden stepped out. So they have to make sure that their party is unified. And so as a political observer, I would say that they need to get in line. Those people who toppled Biden, they got Walz because they asked for it. They took a risk, and now this is the result. But what about the other side? What do they think? So Donald Trump and his MAGA allies are starting their litany of attacks on Walz, calling him a radical leftist, a communist. I saw a lot of people claiming that Harris had doubled down and caved into the demands of the radical wing of the Democratic Party by picking, Walz over Shapiro. J.D. Vance has taken the lead of going after his opponent. But in a good gesture, he did make a phone call, which resulted in a voicemail. Now, Democrats, regardless, need to prepare for the attacks on Walz. Not necessarily on Walz himself, but the idea of it being a reflection of Kamala Harris's judgment. Donald Trump is experiencing buyer's remorse right now over J.D. Vance. Because you know what? J.D. Vance, he has failed to generate a single good headline for himself. That's a fact. And Democrats and Harris now need to make sure that they're not going to be in a position like that with Walz. Hopefully, they did a lot of research into their candidate, because any screw up by Walz is now a screw up by Kamala Harris. But of course, as we like to say in politics, we always say it, the VP pick has just never been a deciding factor in an election. No one goes to the polls to vote for vice president. So Walz is here to stay. Him and Harris are right now, actually, as we're recording this episode, in Philadelphia at a rally marketing the ticket. And J.D. Vance will now be in a shadowing tour, going to all, the regional areas in the states that they are now visiting in their 7 battleground tour. So we'll keep an eye on the developments here on the Ishan S Show. But until then, take a little time to enjoy the interesting and ever-changing world of American politics. We'll see you in the next one.